Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Sisu Road to Revenge, starring Yorma Tomila and Stephen Lang, directed by Halmari Herlander. Now, I have went to this movie twice, and will it be as good as the first one? Let's get into it and find out. It's 1946, and the war is pretty much over as we see Finland seek territory to the Soviet Union as the Finns moved out of a piece of land into Finland. And we start chapter one, which is called Home, as Atami Korpi, returned by Jorma Tomila, along with his dog, is taking wood by wood from his old house out of Finland on a truck while he sees memories of his family, in which I didn't know he had one in the last movie, which was a good choice by Jorma Tomila and director Halmari Herlander. And he wants to rebuild it at the Borderland Patrol with peace. Meanwhile, in Siberia, an old enemy of Atami's named Yegor Dragunov, played by Stephen Lang, gets out of prison and looks for Atami as a reward to stop Atami, as he's a legend for killing all of his Siberians while at war with the Siberians. And Atami taking the wood to a quiet location until he gets stopped by Jaeger. And the first 10 minutes is setting up the characters for sequels works so much. We start chapter 2, which is called Old Enemies, as Jaeger and the Siberian soldiers stop Atami, and they with Jaeger check his passport and start getting after him. But Atami takes off, and one thing that bugged me about the movie, the Siberians gave Atami his passport, never gave Atami his passport back. And I shouldn't let that bother me, so I turned off my brain for this movie after 15 minutes, and it works as an entertaining 89-minute movie from start to finish, as the editing is very tight for this movie. While they come to a stop, Atami points a gun at Yegor, and a Siberian, as Yegor says to not move a muscle, as the Siberian did, and Atami shoots him dead. To death, anyways. And Stephen Lang pulls off Menace tremendously. And after this, Don't Breathe and Avatar, he pulls off villains quite well done. As I liked his villain than in the first movie, as it was a great performance from him. Chapter 3, called Mayor Motor Mayhem, begins with motorcycle Siberians going after Tommy, and they almost kill him, but he manages to shake them off because remember, he's a silent badass, and Yorma Tomila still doesn't talk throughout the movie, as he was great in here, as well as Yegor burning some of Atami's wood and makes a stop to put out the fire while giving the dog some water and to drink. And Tommy's truck is on fire, and he puts it out as well as relaxes, which was a nice breath for the movie until some planes come in. And that's when chapter 4, called Incoming, starts, and Atami starts the truck to get away from the planes, and he steps in an old coverage, stops on an old coverage, excuse me, and one of the planes drops a bomb and on it, and the action sequences were fun to watch for mindless entertainment purposes. Atami drives out to coverage, and the bomb hits the coverage as he gets out in time and goes in the forest, and one of the planes fucking crashes, and Atami gets out of the forest and back to the road and arrives continuously until we get near the ocean, as the road is on the side of it. And one of the planes finds Atami and attacks him from a distance, and Atami pulls off a badass move, which is making a few pieces of wood fall out of the truck and makes the plane fly and crash it into land, and the pilot escapes and almost shoots Atami dead. And Atami gets out of there as another plane approaches and drops some bombs on the ground as he tries to kill Atami, but he lands in the ocean while the pilot gets killed by the explosions. And Atami breaks a window out of the truck, lets the dog out as well as himself, and releases the wood and sees a picture of his dead family. And as he floats up and reunites with his doggy until he gets to shore, and the cinematography was very good, as much like the first movie. When Atami gets to land, he finds a tank. Yegor looks for the stubborn motherfucker, And the English dialogue by the villains in this movie sounded a bit rough, but the good news is I understood what they were saying throughout, and Chapter 5, called Longshot, begins as Yegor hears a Tommy coming to the Soviet border with a tank as well as some of the wood as the Siberians fire at a Tommy and his tank, but he flips out over, which was ridiculous, and his tank is blown apart on the wheel side. And there was no fucking way in hell anyone survived that. So that was fucking cheesy. This movie can be very fucking cheesy sometimes. The Siberians with Yegor capture Tommy and bring him alive, which to me is stupid because he'll kill every single last one of those motherfuckers. But surprisingly, I'm having a fun time with the movie. Tommy is hung and whipped at the same time as he's on a train with Yegor and the Siberians, as Yegor comes in and tells him he killed a lot of families, including a Tommy's, as a Tommy wants to kill Yegor so goddamn badly, while Yegor tells a Tommy he's a mistake and he will bury him into the ground and tells him he'll learn Siberia is a bad place to die in. And after Yegor leaves, Tommy figures out a way to escape, and one of a couple Siberian soldiers comes in and gets killed. And once Tommy gets out of the room and on the train, the other Siberian soldier is just like, fuck this, I hate this job, and I'm jumping off until he gets killed by a tree, which was actually pretty funny to me, as I laughed out loud when that happened, while Chapter 6, called Revenge, comes up and really sees how menacing Yegor really is by killing off the commanders of Siberia, which I got that from the trailers, but it works for this movie as well. Tommy sneaks into a rooms of the Siberian soldiers, and at one point gets out of one safely when he kills one of them, and he bleeds to death as a Tommy kills another one, and the Tommy gets on the glass without making a sound, which has got to fucking hurt. And he eventually looks them in and locks them in. And he sees another group of them as a Tommy climbs on top of the train until he hits his head and gets in a room he doesn't want to be in and kills every single last one of them, while Yegor hears it all and breaks the train apart. And we see that what I brought up a minute ago, we see Yegor killing the high command of the Siberian soldiers and gets his payment with a Tommy pulling a torpedo out to that piece of the train towards Yegor. And that was a clever way to pull off that climax, which I'm currently talking about now. And this movie is clever in my opinion. Tommy gets to Yegor and fights him off, which was a brutal fight between good guy and bad guy. Like at one point, they get to the sink and the Tommy tries to stab him with a spoon, but needed a fork and gets him eventually there. Until Tommy almost defeated him, but he unleashes the torpedo and Yegor, and it blows his ass up. And final chapter comes, and Tommy gets to the borderline to Finland, as Tommy gets there and rebuilds his house in Finland with some assistance by some helpers who just came to help him. And the climax was a fun, entertaining time at the movies. But is it as good as the first movie? Should I say watch this movie? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 7.0 out of 10. Not as good as the first movie, but I like the choices this movie makes by the movie's main actor Jorma Tommila and director Halmari Harlander, as the first 10 minutes sets up the characters to a sequel, which works so much. And I turned on my brain after the first 15 minutes of the movie, and it works for an entertaining 89-minute movie, as the editing was so tight for this movie, while Stephen Lang pulls off Menace tremendously, and his performance was great. And I like this villain more than the villain in the first movie, while Jorma Tommila doesn't talk in this movie, as he was as great as he was in the first movie. The action sequences were fun to watch for mindless entertainment purposes, as the cinematography was very good, like the first movie, and I noticed the English dialogue by the villains of this series sounded a bit rough. But the good news is I understood what they were saying throughout, and some of the shit they do in this movie is ridiculous and cheesy, but it's still fun in my opinion. And I had fun. I had a fun time watching this movie twice for this review from start to finish. And some of this can be stupid as hell, but it's a recommendation for the movie as it's clever. And the final fight between Tommy and Yegor was brutal at times when that happened. And the climax was a fun, entertaining time I had at the movies. And this was a hell of a lot of fun. And if you have fond memories of the first movie, you'll like this one. So give this thing a watch, as you won't be disappointed. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for the Sisu retrospective. And until then, I am one stubborn motherfucker.